Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us here at the Korea Society for today's program, North Korea's Evolving Cyber Strategy. My name is Jonathan Corrado. I'm the Policy Director here at the Society. This is a topic that we've been covering pretty closely. We've done a number of programs in the past on this same issue. So in 2018, we hosted Priscilla Moriuchi, formerly of Recorded Future, and that program was very creatively titled Evolution of North Korea's Cyber Threat. So you can see today, we've really changed things a lot. And in 2023, we invited Jean Lee, co-host of the BBC's Lazarus Heist, and Michael Barnhart for a program called The North Korean Cyber Threat. So we're just so creative with our naming. It's a pleasure to introduce today's speakers. First of all, we have Mitch Haszard. He's the Principal Threat Intelligence Analyst at the Strategic and Persistent Threats team at Recorded Future. And very importantly, he's also an alumni of the Kim Koo Professional Series here at the Korea Society. So thank you so much for joining us, Mitch.
Thank you.
Next up, we've got Scott Kardas, who is Geopolitical Threat Analyst at Recorded Future. Scott is also an alumni of the Kim Koo Professional Series. Thanks for joining us, Scott.
Glad to be here.
And our audience also has a number of Kim Koo Professional Series alum, so very happy to see you all. The Korea Society thanks our corporate sponsors, our individual members, and the Korea Foundation for their support, which has made this program possible. We're going to provide an opportunity for people to send their questions in, so policy@koreasociety.org. You can email, and then we'll give priority to the folks who are here in the room to come right up here to the podium and ask their questions directly to the speakers. The moderator for today's session is Chelsie Alexandre. Chelsie, over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jonathan, for that really warm introduction. And thank you to our guests today, Mitch and Scott, for joining us. And I thought we could kick off the conversation by talking about your backgrounds on this topic, North Korea's cyber strategy evolving in all the different iterations of the title that we've done, and what you currently do at Recorded Future. So feel free to kick it off.
Sure. I guess I'll start.
Yeah.
First, thank you for hosting us. Thank you all for coming. We're excited to be here. My name is Mitch Haszard. I'm a Principal Threat Intelligence Analyst at Recorded Future. And the team that I'm on, that Jonathan mentioned, is called Strategic and Persistent Threats. So we focus on researching all state-sponsored cyber activity for our clients and help them defend their networks. So we're talking about North Korea today, but we also research other state-sponsored threats.
Yeah, I'm Scott Kardas. I'm on the Global Issues team, or Globus team, at Recorded Future. We cover a lot of physical and geopolitical threats that kind of encompasses the whole world. So we do Big Four cooperation, let's say China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. I specialize in more Northeast Asian security.
Yeah, awesome. So obviously today we'll focus on North Korea. My first question is going to be to Mitch. So can you tell us a bit about how North Korea's cyber strategy is evolving in terms of its methods and its targets, and how you're able to track their activities, as much as you can tell us without revealing too many of our secrets?
Sure. And we've brought a few slides to help guide the conversation today. So the regime doesn't share much information about its cyber strategy, right? So because we can't go directly to the regime and, look at policy documents or ask them, hey, what are you doing? We have to look at what they're doing to kind of make sense of, their cyber strategy. When we look at what they're doing, they're primarily doing two things, and that's stealing information and stealing money. All countries, conduct espionage, right? So it's not surprising that, the North Korean government is also trying to steal information from its adversaries. But what sets North Korea apart from most of the world is that they are a country that is also stealing a lot of money and making a lot of money through fraudulent and illicit means. So this is from one of the reports that was shared in the link for this event. This is a bit dated. This is a snapshot of time. So we looked at what industries are they targeting, and it's probably not surprising, but we see government, cryptocurrency, media, finance, defense, there, right? So you can kind of break these up into two separate categories. One is going to be information gathering, right? So maybe government, media, defense. They want to learn about their adversaries. They want to learn about, what people reporting them, or people who are reporting on their activities are doing. And then cryptocurrency and traditional finance, they're trying to make money to finance the regime. And then I guess, in terms of how they make this money, I can talk about that a little bit, and we'll kind of go back in time. And I think that, the North Korean regime has, they recognize the value of making money through the internet very early on. So if we go back in history, 10 plus years, we see some of these North Korean groups trying to make money through, setting up online casinos, gambling websites, working with organized crime, right, to try and make money, kind of like hack for hire services and things like that. And they were successful in making money, but I think they realized that they could make more through, at that time, the traditional finance system, right? So we saw them targeting, the accounts of individual people, right? Or doing these kind of ATM cash out schemes where they're able to kind of jackpot an ATM and steal money, which they were achieving success, but then, up around 10 years ago in 2015, they realized that instead of targeting individuals or, doing this kind of small cybercrime type activities, they could make a lot more money if they targeted banks themselves, right? And I think many of the audience are aware or familiar with this. That's when we saw a series of kind of these audacious, swift hijacking events where they were able to steal a lot of money through the traditional finance system. And some of that was clawed back, but some of that ultimately ended up in the hands of the regime. But then, I think there was a strong reaction from the international community in terms of shoring up the SWIFT system. And shortly after that as well, we have this kind of this other event, which I'll call the first widespread or like widely known cryptocurrency bubble, which was 2017, 2018. That was kind of the craze when everyone was like, you should buy crypto, right? Everyone was buying Bitcoin or Litecoin or something on their phones. And that's when it got really popular in South Korea as well. We saw this huge craze in South Korea. And I remember at the time there was this arbitrage where the price of Bitcoin was different in South Korea and the US. So you would have people in South Korea wanting to, I forget if you bought Bitcoin here at a cheaper price and they could sell it there at a higher price and you'd make a little bit of money.
That's what it was. I had random people messaging me on social media saying, hey, dude, could you sell Bitcoin and you'll take part of the arbitrage? It's like, not happening.
Yes, yeah. I don't think that exists anymore. But yes, can't make money like that anymore. But and at that time, we saw these operators, dabbling in it, right? You see individuals that claim that my cryptocurrency wallet was drained, right? Somebody stole my money. And then we quickly see exchanges, right, in South Korea and other parts of the world that announce that they've been breached, and some of these crypto funds were stolen. And I think at that point, these groups and the regime realized that it's a lot easier to target the cryptocurrency industry than the traditional finance industry, and there are a few reasons for that. The traditional finance industry is heavily regulated. And they have massive cybersecurity budgets as a result of that, right? Some of the largest financial institutions have bigger cybersecurity budgets than countries. So from the regime's perspective, you can perhaps attempt to make a lot of money, stealing from a traditional bank, but we have this whole burgeoning industry that's unregulated or very lightly regulated, doesn't have strong cybersecurity policies and procedures in place. And it's kind of just like the Wild West, right? So from their perspective, I think they realize that it's a lot easier to steal cryptocurrency than traditional currency. And then it's a lot easier to move that currency, is what we all know, to send money from one address to another address. So they quickly pivoted to targeting cryptocurrency institutions. And we still see them doing that today. And then, COVID happened. It just keeps going on and on, right?
Yeah.
And everyone went remote. And then we start to see these reports of these suspicious individuals or IT workers that are, gaining employment at various companies around the world. And I think the regime realized that there was an avenue here that they could exploit the remote work environment and gain fraudulent employment at companies that would pay them a salary and then launder that back to the regime. And I think we'll talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I did want to just follow up on one thing you mentioned at the start of your response, which was that this was a little dated. So if this were the most up-to-date graph, what would we be seeing? Because we just talked a lot about cryptocurrency, but here, like targeting government seems to be number one. Would we see a shift in that based on what you're saying?
So I guess a few caveats to this graph is that, I think in the cybersecurity industry or just in general, everybody only sees one slice of the pie, right? Recorded Future has unique visibility into certain aspects of what these groups do. Other companies or, previous speakers that have spoke here have other access and collection that allow them to see different aspects of this activity. So this graph could look different depending on, who is presenting here, but I think the sample size is big enough to kind of give you an idea that these top industry verticals are verticals that they focus on. And, I would say that it would probably look similar. I haven't ran the numbers recently, but in the activity that Recorded Future sees day to day, we still see them targeting, a lot of government agencies, cryptocurrency companies, or individuals that work for these in these industries. So I would suspect that it would be similar. Maybe a few of these industries would be flipped around, but I wouldn't expect, aerospace to suddenly become number one. Yeah.
All right, sounds good. Well, thank you for that. And I guess obviously we're seeing how much the strategy has evolved over time from targeting traditional financial institutions to kind of the internet, crypto. And so, Scott, I was wondering if you could talk to us a bit about how these cyber operations fit into the Kim regime's larger military and geopolitical strategy.
Sure. Kind of one of the biggest things we're seeing nowadays is the concept of gray zone warfare. Is a cyber attack an act of war? And when we look at it, let's say Russia-Ukraine, for example, of course, if Russia cyber attacks Ukrainian infrastructure, and that's in conjunction with a physical kinetic attack, rockets, ballistic missiles, or just a general assault on a front, then yeah, you could say that's part of an act of war. But absent that is North Korea, if they engage in cyber operations, let's say ransomwaring a hospital, is that an act of war? We would say that bombing a hospital is an act of war, like a military attacking it, but is, stealing someone's patient information, is that an act of war? And we in the international community, I say we, I should say the international community at large, hasn't really decided that. So the Kim regime is very likely saying, hey, we can engage in this gray zone of warfare. We can do these things that can annoy our adversaries, that can gain us intelligence if we steal information or gain us money. And they can't really say anything about it. And kind of as Mitch said, every government is doing this. To say that I'm not saying every government steals, cryptocurrency, but every government is engaged in cyber operations for intelligence gathering purposes at least. So it's hard for, you to point the finger when it's, you're doing the same thing.
Right.
So,
and
and I should say, obviously the second one is obviously conducting these cyber operations has been lucrative. They get a lot of money, traditional money through, some of we'll talk a little more about the IT workers, traditional currency, but obviously cyber or cryptocurrencies, stealing from cryptocurrency or just making people pay as a ransom. Yeah. It's very lucrative for the regime right now.
Right. And I guess kind of lobbing off of what you said about the indecision on what to describe as warfare if you're attacking or cyber attacking a hospital, et cetera. I wonder if that feeds into my next question, which both of you can answer, on attribution and how it's North Korea conducting these attacks when we think it's North Korea, especially since, like you both have said, every country is engaging in espionage and gaining information. And so kind of connected to that, how do you think developments in AI affect our ability to identify and accurately attribute attacks to North Korean hacking groups? And Sretha Thangaswamy at Syracuse also asked a similar question about kind of the role of AI in these cyber operations. So feel free, either of you.
Sure, I can start.
Yeah, I'll take the AI, I think.
Okay, I might touch on it a little bit.
Go for it.
All right. So you're right. We usually don't have definitive evidence like here is a photo of a North Korean individual that has, hacked your computer, right? Sometimes we do, right? But rarely that is the case, right? Because we're not able to, ask them in person or have this kind of definitive, like smoking gun evidence, we have to look at the complete picture of what they're doing. There's a few ways of doing that, right? If I am, trying to gain access to, an organization's network, I have to interact with the internet, right? I have to, set up my command and control server. I have to develop malware. I have to maybe send a phishing email, right? I have to do things that interact with, the internet at large and then other people, right? So, if I have to do that, there's usually breadcrumbs that are left of my activity, right? This is not unique to Record the Future, but, in any company or even cybersecurity departments and, non-cybersecurity companies will take a look at this whole picture and see, okay, let's take a look at, what is the malware that has been used in this attack, right? What does the phishing email look like? What does the phishing website look like? What are they doing once they gain access to a system, right? What type of, this is getting a bit technical, I apologize, but what type of scripts are they running, in this network? And looking at all of this, these kind of, we'll call them like network artifacts, we then, we have these kind of cybersecurity frameworks that I won't get into detail here, but, we're able to kind of structure all of this information in a way that allows cybersecurity researchers to assess with some level of confidence that this activity is associated with a specific group. But sometimes groups try to disguise who they are, right? And I think you kind of touched on that in your question. So I think a good example of that is the 2018 Pyeongchang Olympics. There was this wiper malware that was deployed called Olympic Destroyer, and it was a Russian state-sponsored group that was responsible for that, but they tried to make it look like it was a North Korean group. And I think that was a time maybe that they weren't allowed at the Olympics because of the doping scandal. I don't remember exactly, but that could have been the Olympics. So groups do try to disguise, who they are. But then on your point for AI, we haven't really seen them use AI to try and, cover their tracks or, just disguise what they're doing. But we do see them use AI in all aspects of their work. So we have evidence of them using AI to translate things that they're looking at, using AI to help them develop malware, using using ChatGPT or any other AI to have a conversation with it. We've seen that, and then IT workers using AI to assist in their fraudulent jobs.
Wow. Scott, did you have anything to jump on there?
In addition with that AI, people are using the AI to do the face swap. So you could put someone else's face on you in a video. And right now, it's not that good, but it could fool people. It's not the best. It's not the worst. It's not like the 1990s green screen, but, it's getting better. And they use AI for that. And like Mitch mentioned, using AI to write up a resume or to write a code even. I've seen some examples of North Koreans apparently using AI to write malware and scripts for them or phishing, capabilities. So as AI evolves, we're going to very likely see North Korea and other threat actors using AI to, I should say, as a force multiplier. It's not going to replace them, but you're not going to take an untrained person who could just be like, oh, do malware. Mm-hmm. But you're going to have people saying, I can now do more, do better, and be more efficient.
So a little more proliferation and maybe a little harder to also identify?
Maybe. I think it kind of, as Mitch said, we're going to North Korea has their own trends and things that they use. Russia has their own. China has their own. Mm-hmm. So, but maybe we could see more people trying to hide who they are. Yeah. Use AI to maybe try and hide their identity, but how effective that's going to be remains to be seen. Gotcha.
And I was wondering if you guys are able to share any kind of, seems like fingerprints or artifacts of North Korean cyber attacks or phishing emails, for instance. What are some things I guess normal people could look for if they feel like they're being targeted?
Sure. I think if you work in this industry or attending this event, you may work on something related to North Korea. So, that random email you get from, a generic name and a generic Gmail address that's asking you about your work and wants to set up an interview or wants to, have you answer some questions of theirs, I would just double check that, this person is legitimate. What they claim is legitimate before you jump on the reply button.
Gotcha.
Especially to that point, before you click on any links.
Yes, that is
Because that's how they get you. You just click on the link and boom,
Yeah.
Maybe they downloaded malware. There's very sophisticated ways of doing spear phishing. And the other thing is, it isn't just email, it's on social media too. If someone approaches you on LinkedIn and seems very curious about your specific work and is asking a lot of pointed questions, you have to be aware of it. And, social media, let's be honest here, dating apps, the old trick of send the pretty girl at the bar to the guy, it works on social media too. It works on dating apps. Just a different arena for the same game.
Oh, wow. Well, I guess we'll go back to the professional sphere. And you guys have been talking a little bit about the IT worker threat. So if you guys just want to jump in a little bit more about how the pandemic kind of has shifted the landscape for the threat posed by North Korea through this IT worker scheme.
Sure. I can start with that.
Yeah.
I think I've also prepared another slide that's related to that. So when we talk about IT workers, there are two groups that record future tracks, and we call them Purple Bravo, and this we see Purple Bravo here, and Purple Delta. So this chart is Purple Bravo, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But how we separate these is, we'll start with Purple Bravo, since this is what the map is about. They are a group that creates fictitious job opportunities, mostly in the software development space, and specifically targeting software developers in cryptocurrency, fintech, just like IT services. And they, create these jobs, these fictitious jobs. They reach out to software developers directly, with some sort of, enticing job opportunity. And then if you're familiar with kind of how a software development interview goes, there's usually like a technical assessment, right? We want to test your ability to code. So as a part of that technical assessment, the job candidate that thinks this is a legitimate opportunity, is being told to run some software or download a repository, but that is actually malicious. And then, they gain access to, their computer, and we see them, trying to steal money from these individuals, right? If they, work in the cryptocurrency industry, they may have their own, cryptocurrency themselves, so they're trying to, empty their own wallets. But what we also see is, we'll talk about this map now, is evidence of them targeting the companies that these individuals work for. So what we've seen is, I think I just said that, they're targeting job seekers. So, I guess how would they gain access to a company if they're targeting a job seeker, right? Because if you were to, I don't know, go work for another society, not the Korea Society, right? You probably, not to say that you would, but,
Please, Jonathan, let me keep my job.
you probably wouldn't take the interview on your Korea Society laptop, right? But what we see evidence of is some of these individuals doing exactly that, right? They're doing the interview or the coding challenge, what appears to be either on their corporate device or from their corporate network. So in some cases, we see evidence that they did this malicious challenge on a corporate device, and then we see evidence of exfiltration not only from that individual's laptop but from the company that they work for. And this is a breakdown. This is also a bit dated, but it is a breakdown of some recent targeting. This is of this year of the group. So we see that, the United States is quite red, and we see a lot of targeting there. But something that I think is interesting is we see a heavy amount of targeting in the South Asia region. And at first, it's kind of like, oh, why is this, right? But then when you think about it, and the companies that we're seeing that are being targeted and potentially breached, this region of the world has a very well-developed IT services industry, right? They have a lot of, software development companies, staff augmentation companies. A lot of companies in, other countries run their back offices out of this region of the world. So I think that's an interesting point that I'd like to highlight is that, I think we're very focused on, companies in the U.S. that may hire an IT worker or get compromised by Purple Bravo, but I don't know if as much attention is being placed on, kind of your supply chain, right? Your software supply chain, the contractors that, one of your software suppliers are hiring in other parts of the world. And then, sorry, I'd also like to briefly talk about Purple Delta. And Purple Delta is our name for what let's call more traditional IT workers. So these are individuals that are seeking fraudulent employment at companies all around the world. And I think we're all familiar with them, trying to gain employment at, Fortune 500 companies or government agencies and things like that. But I just want to highlight that these individuals are trying to make a buck in every way. So it's not just gaining employment at a big company. We see them, on freelancer websites. We see them in private forums, Telegram, Discord, doing gig work, right? I have this web development project. I want to create a personal website. I'll pay somebody $200. They're jumping on those opportunities as well.
Gotcha. And yeah, Scott, if there's anything you wanted to.
No, I mean, I think Mitch covered a lot with Purple Bravo, Purple Delta on that right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, just targeting poor job seekers who are just trying to make it. So I guess I kind of want to turn over to another report by Recorded Future that's about kind of sanctions, and that despite sanctions being levied on North Korea, there's increasing access to foreign technology in the country by way of its relationships with China and Russia. So I was wondering if, Scott, if you could tell us a bit about that.
Obviously, it's kind of been like a somewhat open secret. Vice went here years ago to Russia. There's logging camps that North Korea had there. Russia employed North Korean laborers. Obviously, China does too, even though they signed on to these international sanctions. So there's always been at least some level of cooperation. But recently, obviously, since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and then since Kim Jong-un sent at least about 14,000 combat troops to Kursk, at least, I'm going to be very specific here, they haven't entered Ukraine yet, that we've now seen what is likely technological transfer from Russia to North Korea in exchange for these troops. And it's a lot more brazen. I believe after Kim Jong-un met Putin in Vladivostok, I believe in 2023, not 2013, September, shortly after that, they successfully launched a spy satellite, despite them not having the technological capabilities to do so. And while, again, we don't have the smoking gun to say, oh, Russian scientists helped them, we start to see this cooperation. It's like, oh, well, if you have these technical failures, and then Russia is obviously able to have a robust space program, maybe they helped them out, or I should say it's very likely that they helped them out. And it should also be known that it's not just Russia and China. North Korea has a long history with Iran. And at one point, I believe it was April last year, that or maybe this past April, time has no meaning, I believe it was this past April, but there was a time when North Korean scientists, ballistic missile scientists, were in Tehran the same time Russian ballistic missile scientists were there. So we don't know if they're meeting, we don't know what they talked about, but it's very unlikely that Pyongyang sends their people to Tehran. Just so happens to be the same weekend that the Russians are there. And we don't know what if they talked, but again, Iranian ballistic missiles do share a lot of similarities with North Korean ballistic missiles. So this technology transfer goes kind of both ways. Maybe we could see North Korea helping Iran or vice versa.
Right.
So,
and we actually had a whole program on the North Korea-Iran relationship here at the Korea Society with Bruce Bechtel. So go check that out if you want to learn about that very long history. And it's just interesting to see that collaboration. Do you think it could extend to the cyber world to the extent that you're able to talk about that?
I would say it's likely that they will extend to the cyber realm, especially so long as Moscow and Pyongyang's strategic goals are aligned. If there is a shift, whatever could drive that shift where they are no longer aligned, then we'd likely see less cooperation or none. But at the moment, it still seems to be like Russia and North Korea are very heavily aligned against their perceived enemies in the West. And they are, they have the enemy, my enemy is my friend. So they have a lot of reasons why they would cooperate and want to continue cooperating in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
President?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Two things. So one point about the IT workers before that I would like to talk about, and then I'd like to add to Scott's question. So on the IT worker point, I just want to highlight that I think it's easy to talk about these things in the abstract, right? Like the North Korean regime or like Purple Delta or Purple Bravo, right? But like these are people, right, that are doing this, right? And they may not be good people, but they're a product of the system that they were born into, right? So, if you or I were born in North Korea and we're given the opportunity to, go to a prestigious school and we say, we'll teach you computer science, right? And, you'll have the opportunity to potentially leave North Korea and make, from their perspective, more money than you'll ever make in North Korea, right? And support your family. We very well could be IT workers as well, right?
Wow. Yeah. And on to the other point.
And then, so the other point, I think we have a slide for this as well. So I think collaboration does extend further into the cyber realm, which we'll talk about, in that we see in one of the reports that we shared, we see evidence of North Koreans within North Korea, using Chinese technology, right, cell phones, laptops, and Chinese and Russian web services, so like email services or search engines and things like that. But the slide here is that this is a company that, appears to be some sort of IT company that, is based in China, this Shenyang Xiwang technology company. And basically, we found a cluster of these companies late last year. They all kind of looked like this, had this type of like naming convention, had these kind of generic pages. And what we quickly learned was that this cluster of companies were all imitating other legitimate IT companies. So, this is just ripped from another legitimate IT company that they've copied the website of and have created this seemingly legitimate company here. But we couldn't quite figure out what they were for. So we had this kind of tentative link to some other front companies that were linked to North Korea, but in this cluster of companies that look like this, all we could see was that, okay, they're faking other legitimate companies. They clearly are not offering these services. The registration information all appeared to be individuals in China. So we weren't quite sure what was going on at the time. But then fast forward to June of this year, and the U.S. Department of Justice indicted several individuals in China. And there were individuals some of them that we found that registered these companies. And in that indictment, they called out many of the companies that we discovered. And these were being basically used to launder money that IT workers were making in the U.S. back to North Korea. So I think the collaboration does extend into other aspects as well.
No, absolutely. And your point about how there is like a person on the other side with the IT worker, I was wondering how much of the money that's being made through these fraudulent schemes are in possession for the IT worker, or is this all going to the regime? I mean, still probably more money than you'd make in North Korea, but how much are they actually keeping?
I think it's hard to put an exact dollar amount, right? It's not like each worker is earning $50,000 a year.
Right.
From all the reports I've seen, it appears that each worker keeps approximately 10%, and then the regime takes the other 90%. Now, it's important to note that with these IT workers, the regime taking the money, they also have to, pay for overhead costs, which could include, utilities, renting a space, bribing local officials, laundering money costs money, So ironically enough, you don't get it for every dollar you launder, you don't get a dollar back.
Right.
So the regime kind of takes on these costs, but also the worker doesn't get all the money. They don't get to keep it. And we don't know for certain when the workers go back to North Korea, because a lot of them are based in China. When they go back, do they keep all the money? Likely they do, because it'd be kind of silly for, word gets around. But at the same time, they're definitely not keeping all of it. So I know one worker we found, and there is a criminal indictment, worked and earned about $184,000 in a year. It's a lot of money. I was like, wow. But so that worker probably kept about $18,000 when you look at it. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
That's way more than most pretty much any North Korean earns in a year. So about 10% is roughly what we think.
I'll just add, Scott touched on it as well, but it's just important to highlight that they have to be self-financed, right? So if you are an IT worker or you're part of one of these groups that is conducting cyber attacks, you need to buy the infrastructure that you're using. You need to buy the domains you're using. You have to pay for, like you said, the bills and things like that. So, it's up to those groups to finance themselves as well and their operations.
Yeah. And there's no, like a lot of these groups also have a boss watching them. So you might be in the room with 10 other guys conducting these schemes, but your boss is still there, and your boss could also take some of the money that he's like, hey, I need my cut. Yeah. So it's not just a wonderful, it's not a high trust society. There's still like corruption involved within North Korea.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Wow. And compared to, I guess, I was just curious about how lucrative this IT worker scheme is from the past few years, because it sounds like this was very much a post-pandemic kind of phenomenon. So.
The UN says they're netting between $300 and about $600-700 million a year, which is a lot of money. Obviously, netting versus grossing, they probably gross closer to $1 billion. I don't want to put my foot in my mouth and say they are. Yeah. So they are likely grossing closer to $1 billion based on, they have to launder the money, the costs, and all that other stuff. But the regime is obviously getting a lot of money from this. And they believe that this is very much a worthwhile endeavor compared to other ways that they've conducted cyber operations in the past. Otherwise, why would they be doing this?
Right. Okay, well, I guess I want to shift over to kind of pivot to the scale of these attacks. So as noted in reports published by Insect Group, the DPRK is capable of conducting destructive cyber attacks against both private corporations and public infrastructure. So think like North Korea targeting Sony Pictures as retribution for the movie The Interview, as we all probably remember back in, was it like
2014, I believe.
2014. And then also the destabilization of the UK's National Health Service with the WannaCry ransomware attack. But what I found interesting in reading those reports was like noting that these attacks are like pretty rare, like how big and destructive they are. And so I was curious about your thoughts on why those types of attacks that are pretty hard to punish, I guess, the regime for aren't more common.
Sure. I'll take this one.
Yeah, you can start off.
Yeah. So, I think the regime has shown it has, the intention and capability to pull off these attacks, right? You mentioned Sony and WannaCry, but if you go back further, right, I think they were experimenting in around 2009. They did this major DDoS attack against institutions in South Korea. In 2011, they deployed some wiper malware on a bank in South Korea. So, they have the ability to do this, but I think it comes back to what is their overarching cyber strategy. And, even a country has limited time and resources, right? Limited personnel. So if I'm Kim Jong-un, if I'm, one of these, kind of team leaders in one of these groups, I have a certain amount of individuals that are working a certain amount of time. And I have to steal a lot of information, right? From my traditional adversaries, from people that the regime deems important to gain information from. I have to make a lot of money, right? We live in a heavily sanctioned country, and we know we can make a lot of money by stealing cryptocurrency or gaining fraudulent employment. So, from that perspective, I think it makes more sense to keep doing what we're doing, which is making a lot of money that we're not being punished for. Stealing a lot of information. Rather than these, high profile destructive attacks that are kind of one-offs, and it may cause some, damage to, let's say, Sony Pictures. I think, there was some damage there, but in terms of the day-to-day operations, I think I would rather be making money and stealing information.
Yeah. I mean, another point too is they've already done it, so you need to keep doing it. You've already kind of sent the message.
Right.
Is there a need to continuously do that when maybe you don't want to do that because maybe then you draw too much attention? Because right now, like you said, like stealing money, stealing crypto, these false things, it's harder to mobilize a big task force globally to start punishing this. Whereas it's like, hey, company, you kind of failed because you hired the North Korean. But if it's like Sony Pictures says, hey, U.S. government, like we got, we're getting attacked by North Korea, like, this is going back to the gray zone warfare thing. Are you going to get involved? Oh, well, maybe Washington does want to start doing something, and so targeting what North Korean assets are outside North Korea and other countries. So, but doing this now, if you keep doing it, you bring attention to yourself.
Yeah. No, I guess if it ain't broke, don't fix it. This is working for them. They're making a lot of money doing exactly what they're doing.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think that, in a time of greater instability, right, maybe some sort of conflict on the Korean Peninsula or some sort of event, I think you would see some of these resources being shifted to, attacks that would support any sort of kinetic operation or attacks to try and, destabilize the South, similar to what we see with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, where they were deploying wiper malware and things like that, using cyber as a means to inflict some sort of damage on a country.
Gotcha. So kind of keeping track of what's going on geopolitically as well, and the response through cyber as well.
Yeah.
I've got one more question here, so I want to encourage our in-person audience to start thinking of any questions you'd like to ask our guests. And you can line up at the podium. Make sure to keep your questions question-like and introduce yourself. And so for you two, I was wondering, you mentioned that there hasn't really been a rally for a global task force to be created to mitigate this issue. So I was wondering what target entities like governments, banks, cryptocurrency firms, nonprofits like us, and academics, what can we all do to address these threats, and how should these different entities kind of work together?
I'll start, I guess.
Sure.
I mean, the difficulty is you have a bunch of different organizations, different, the data operations. It's like herding cats. How are you going to get all of them to move in the same way, and how are you going to get everyone to share information? And it's very unlikely that you're going to ever get that. It's a wonderful world where people would do that, but they're very unlikely that they will. So a lot of it is just kind of having robust internal protocols to make sure you're not getting phished. Make sure your employees are practicing good password protocols. Don't reuse passwords. Don't save them in your browser. Have strong passwords. Change them. The whole 9 yards. 2-factor authentication. Everyone's like, oh my god, I should be doing this. Write this down.
I'm like writing this down right now, taking notes.
But it just absent a government mandating a blanket cybersecurity thing, it's very difficult to get all these different organizations to coordinate on one standard defense.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think I'll add that there are some initiatives. I think the U.S. and South Korean governments have a high-level cybersecurity dialogue. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security, CISA, has released several reports on North Korean cyber activity or other state-sponsored cyber activity. So I think there is some initiative and effort in trying to address these, but if I'm an individual and organization wondering, am I going to employ an IT worker, or is a North Korean group interested in my company or me? I think the first step is understanding if you are a target, right? What is my threat landscape? Are one of these groups interested in my industry vertical? Do I work in an industry that has employed a lot of IT workers in the past? So I think it's first recognizing what your threat landscape is, and then from there, if you do realize that I could be, or my organization could be, a potential target, you're able to take proactive defensive measures to mitigate this. And I think on that point, the good news is that most of the activity we still see starts with a phish. There are other methods of gaining access to networks and systems, but the overwhelming majority of cyber attacks still starts with a phish. So it's just being aware, that human element of like, is this LinkedIn request legitimate? Is this email from a person that I actually know? Things like that.
All right. Well, we can turn it over to audience questions. You can line up here, but Robert, come over to the podium.
Thank you very much, Robert Bizarek. I have a question. You mentioned that these IT workers are generally, at least often, based in China. To what extent is this tolerated, supported by the Chinese government, or is this done in ways that the Chinese government can prevent it? In other words, to what extent is China collaborating with North Korea? Thanks.
It's a little difficult to answer, simply because we don't know what Beijing does behind closed doors. The fact that they do operate would imply at least some level of at least tacit acceptance by Beijing. I think it would be insane to say that China is not aware of these North Korean groups operating, typically on the border towns of China and North Korea. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Beijing is funding them or supporting them actively. So I don't really think we can say more than that. Unfortunately, I wish I had more insight into that. But
Yeah. I think I'll just add that we haven't seen any direct evidence of them, like IT workers, operating from within China, but we have seen some evidence of them operating from within Russia. We have stronger evidence to that. But I think I will add that of the groups we track that are conducting cyber attacks or cybercrime, we don't really see them targeting entities within China, right? So there may be some sort of implicit agreement where we will let you operate from here, but don't target our own organizations.
don't bite the hand that feeds you in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you have a question, come up to the podium. We need you on the mic so we can hear you.
Okay, two quick questions. First, in industrial verticals, on the horizontal scale, it says count. Is in relative number terms or percentage terms? Second question is regarding the purple Bravo, purple Delta. Just who coined that terms? I mean, why that? Any reference to?
Sure. So this count here is a count of campaigns. So at the time this report was written, this would be the count of unique campaigns that we track. Numbers, yes.
Just single numbers or thousands?
Single numbers of campaigns, right? So for example, one campaign targeting the government vertical doesn't mean there was one agency targeted, right? It could be many. Does that make sense? And then the second part, names. Yes, I think there are a lot of names in the cybersecurity field for a lot of groups. And Recorded Future, we have our own threat actor taxonomy where we name certain groups in a specific way. And for North Korean groups, we use the purple color followed by Alpha, Bravo, things like that to distinguish different sets of activity, right? So this allows us to distinguish, for example, we track a group called Purple Alpha, and Purple Alpha is a group that primarily targets individuals in South Korea, right? So it allows us to distinguish different sets of activity, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Just to kind of jump in there, I was also curious about this, reading some of the reports, how different either government entities, cryptocurrency firms, et cetera, have different naming conventions for all these groups. How difficult does that make it to try to collaborate in mitigating the threat against these different groups, since everyone names them differently? It's hard, how do you know you're being targeted by the same group if everyone's naming them differently?
It's a good question. I think within the industry, people have they have their finger on the pulse of what kind of generally equates to what, right? But from if you're looking from outside the industry and you just see all these names, it can be overwhelming, I'm sure. But I will say, Recorded Future or other companies, we do work together to try and deconflict these names, or at least kind of link these names up to different sets of activity that we think are overlapping. And I think this comes back to the point that we all see a different slice of the pie, right? Yeah. So because we see something that might look like what another vendor names, something else, we have a different kind of view of that activity. Yeah. So it allows us to kind of own what the set of activity is, while at the same time tentatively linking it or overlapping it to some other name.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And feel free to introduce yourself as well.
Sure. Hi, I'm Michelle Mincha Choi. I'm a lead analyst at C4 ADS. I was actually in your Kim Koo cohort. Yeah, good to
nice
see you
again.
So at C4 ADS, we were quite interested in the third-party tools and developers of those tools when it comes to scam centers, and also DPRK labor abroad, and also DPRK IT workers. So you mentioned that they use conventional AI tools like ChatGPT, and then also this kind of vertically integrated money laundering, in which Shenyang Shiwang Tech is probably like closely linked to DPRK entities themselves. Are you seeing any examples of third-party tools or like, marketing software that helps them find all the people on LinkedIn that are potential targets, that are somewhere striking a balance in between, like not completely for the mass market, also not completely done hand in glove with DPRK entities, just somewhere in between? And bonus points if this is true, if there is collusion or if you can see collusion.
What do you mean by collusion?
So like probably the strongest indicator is like the work that we've done in scam centers is that they use marketing software to like, broadly get everybody's email in this room because we signed up for a Korea Society event thing. And then marketing software, it's dual use. You can use it for good or for evil. And we found that some of the third-party tools that they were using like just explicitly market themselves towards scam centers or like scamming activities. So they're not being developed by the scammers themselves, but there is some kind of looking the other way or a collusion or like malicious intent behind the third-party tool.
Okay. Let me take this.
Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
handle most of this.
So I can't say off the top of my head that we've seen them use something like Salesforce to keep track of, who they might view as a client, or something like SendGrid, but I will say, so I guess to answer your question in a couple parts, there's these more, I guess, legitimate ways to gather information of, like emails using some sort of marketing software, but, all of our emails are also in cybercriminal forums in the dark web. And in the past, we have seen evidence of these individuals, also operating in those spaces, right? So I think that, I don't know if they're using legitimate, marketing or sales software to gather information, but I would say, and I probably, I wouldn't be surprised if, you can buy, combo lists of, hundreds of thousands of emails, on a cyber criminal forum for pennies on the dollar. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're also doing that. But in terms of software they're using, I will say that they use a lot of regular enterprise software that you would use in your day-to-day job that we see. So, software development tools or, project management tools, chatting applications that you probably use at your own organization. We see them using all of those for collaboration.
And to jump in there, how does that feed into, I don't know if you guys can speak to sanctions and stuff, but if a company like the chatting tools that we use is being used by like North Korean IT workers or cyber attackers, then how is the company like responsible for that as a third party organization?
I'll let you answer that, but that's one thing. So a lot of these companies have free versions, right? So I don't think they're paying for like a paid version of something, right? I think they're using a free version of it, and I'll let you.
Well, and even so, if company A has software that, is legitimate uses and you could download it, you can go in any country and get it, obviously, except for North Korea. It's very unlikely that like a North Korean guy is one doing this. They're very likely stealing identities. If they need an identity, they'll steal it. A lot of these IT workers are actually stealing legitimate identities in the United States, for example. One of the more recent ones, I believe, Christina Marie Chapman, it was all over the news past couple weeks. North Korean IT workers stole real identities, changed some stuff around so it would pass the background checks initially. And then, she was a facilitator and helping running these. But so it's like if you need to present a real ID, well, they have it. They have this real information. And maybe a stolen credit card number. And so if software costs $7.99, the vast majority of people are not necessarily going to notice that $7 charge on their credit card. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But that's just one way they likely get around stuff. The other one, like Mitch said, if there's free software or if they're just overseas, maybe someone overseas just buys it for them and then they say, here's a login, use it.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Wow. I don't see any more in-person questions. I'm going to turn to one of the...
One more?
Sure, we'll take one more in person, and then I have a few from our members online.
Just following up on the earlier question about Chinese involvement. So we know that Shenyang technology is used for laundering money. How do we know that? And are there other Chinese companies involved? And has anyone raised that with the Chinese?
So, I mean, I'm not a policy person. I'm a technical person. But in the case of this specific company, there was an indictment in June that called out this company and individuals from the U.S. Department of Justice. So the U.S. Department of Justice identified these individuals and companies as facilitators of laundering money for North Korean IT workers. So yeah, I guess in that case, we have the U.S. government saying this.
Yeah. And to your point about bringing it up to the Chinese government, I would say it's almost certain that there have been issues raised, but again, we are sadly not policymakers or politicians, so the efficacy of that is, kind of
interesting to follow up on. Yeah. All right. Thanks.
So we've got a question from TKS member Roberta Cohen. She asked, what types of information does North Korea hope to gain by sending false invitations, false press interview questions to North Korean specialists? So a lot of people in the audience here, if you're Korea specialists, and by also hacking into computers and phones. So what are they looking for when asking sending invitations, asking these kinds of interview questions? Yeah.
I'll take part of this.
Sure. Yeah.
I think, to quote Sun Tzu, know your enemy, know yourself, and you'll never be in peril. So, yeah, whip that one out there. But truly, when you think about it, North Korea wants to know what we know. They want to know what we're thinking. They want to know what we're assessing and what we're looking at. And if you can just have somebody give that to you, even, unwittingly or unwillingly, that is awesome. And that's just, individuals, North Korea policy experts. But obviously, if they're going for government employees, state information, state secrets, weapons manufacturers, can I get any information from that? That's what they want, because they want to know, hey, is the government looking at me more? Oh, are they developing a weapon that maybe is specifically targeting Pyongyang? If there is one. Are they developing a task force now to tackle our illicit financing operations overseas, stuff like that? So they would love. That's pretty much one of the biggest drivers for that. Obviously, then if they got information, maybe they can extort somebody. If they got embarrassing information, let's be honest, extorting people is still very lucrative. So if they get information like that, that's definitely one of the things they want.
Yeah. I think I'll just echo Scott that if I'm able to ask somebody directly, like, hey, what are you researching? Can you tell me about it? And you willingly tell them, there's not a need to follow up with some sort of phishing email or something like that. And I think it's just natural too, right? If somebody contacts you and they seem legitimate and they're like, hey, let's collaborate on this, you're usually more than willing to be like, oh yeah, let's have a conversation. So I think they're exploiting that trust. But then I think on the flip side of that, if they do gain information, right, it's like, oh, what's the latest report that you're working on? Can you share it with me or something like that? We see them reuse kind of, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, right? They will, send some sort of phishing email and they'll attach, the latest report on, North-South relations or something like that. And that could have been a private report that, they got from another individual. Either they, willingly gave it to them or, they were able to compromise their system and steal it.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Lots of information. I need to be less trusting myself. And then if we have no more in-person questions, I have one more from, we might have one actually. So I'll give it over to Nitai. Yeah.
I work at the National Committee of U.S.-China Relations, Kim Koo alum. Question about deterrence. If there's really, it's very difficult for whether it's governments or international organizations to police the crime, right? And it's really hard to bring folks to justice because it's just a big, they're in North Korea. I mean, Lazarus, that whole BBC, they're physically in person doing jackpots on ATMs, but crypto, it's just they're sitting in the suburbs of Pyongyang and the Russian, the Russian internet cables and their access to the world is impossible to police. It's whack-a-mole. What about deterrence? So how is there, there are parallels to the, with deterrence, there are parallels to the Korean, nuclear issue, and so how ultimately is the U.S. government thinking about deterrence? How do you, or the broader cybersecurity community, think about if punishment, what is the way, is difficult as a pathway for kind of punitive ways against this from preventing this from happening. I mean, the U.S. is a rich target. We've got aging society, infrastructure kind of challenged, and we've got people aren't noticing $7 on their credit card, and that turns into billions. New records that they're pulling in. So, what would be the path forward if you had the opportunity to brief folks on policy, whether it's on the Hill, inside of government? Is deterrence an option, and what would the U.S. credibly be able to potentially do in order to mete that out, to kind of push back or hopefully address these challenges? What do you think?
I got to start with something.
Sure.
So obviously the nuclear option proverbially would be you cut off the internet access for the U.S. from the rest of the world, but that's insane. Would never advise that. But so what it basically boils down to is you're never going to be perfectly safe. There's always going to be some level of risk. It's like, when you always have a lock on your door, right? You lock your house when you leave, even if you're in a really safe neighborhood, because you never know. And a lot of it's just taking reasonable precautions and reasonable steps as an individual, as an entity or a corporation as well. So, obviously getting a lot of internal training on smishing and phishing techniques, making sure you have good password management with your employees and your personal life too. Making sure that you're aware of your social media presence as an individual, making sure you're aware of your family's social media presence as well, because people think, well, I'm safe, but your brother might not be. Your brother might be a little cavalier with his Instagram or his social media and go from there. So that's some of the best steps I would say as an individual or entity that you could take. So, and it's also, it's kind of deterrence is just making it so cost prohibitive for North Korea to go after you or your organization that by the time they get through all of this, it took them months or years, and the reward is just not worth it at that point.
Yeah, I think I just add thank you for the question. I think it's a really difficult question, and there are much smarter people than me that are probably working it. And I don't think about deterrence, right? I think about tracking their activity. So I don't know if I have an answer for how you can deter them, because like you say, you can't physically go to North Korea and arrest them and bring them back here and have stand trial. So I think some of the things the U.S. government has been doing, like naming and shaming, right? Publishing photos of these individuals and saying that they're responsible for these things is a start. Are these individuals deterred from that? I don't really know. Maybe they, if they're overseas, they bring them back home and they're safer there. I think some of the things the U.S. FBI has done in trying to claw back the crypto that they're stealing, and exchanges that cooperate with them, is a step to deterring that. But then I think more on the defensive side, which I have more experience with, is just making sure that we are disseminating information that allows organizations and government agencies to defend themselves in a timely manner, right? So I can't really ask how can we deter them, or respond to how we can deter them, but more about how can we better defend ourselves to prevent them from doing this in the first place.
If you had any policy, but recommendation or something beyond just to the octogenarians in Congress, talk to your grandson about better IT programs. And I understand you guys are on the defensive side of the kind of the situation, but if there was one policy or kind of suggestion or just some, what's something you would say?
One policy or suggestion for everyone out there.
I can't give a specific policy, but I would just say stronger and more robust cryptocurrency regulations. Whether that's know your customer, regulations to make sure that the accounts that people are registering on these exchanges are tied to a legitimate person. I understand you can't police that in maybe some other countries as well, so there's a limitation to that. But then also stronger cybersecurity cybersecurity regulations for the cryptocurrency industry. I think that having some sort of standards similar to traditional finance spends lots of money on defending their organizations. Mm-hmm. A lot of these cryptocurrency startups, right? They don't have a lot of resources and probably don't think about hiring a whole cybersecurity or threat intelligence team to defend themselves, and that's why we see these billion-dollar heists. I think I would just say stronger cryptocurrency regulation. I don't know, Scott, if you have anything.
Yeah, well, you mentioned cryptocurrency. I'd also say, you hear about these cryptocurrency games that get hacked, kind of similar thing, having good security in places that you wouldn't think are a risk. It's just because you think, well, the bank's safe. Yeah, you have a lot of protection at the bank, but there's other places that you could get in trouble with. Money could get stolen from other places and information. So, yeah, like I would just reiterate, good personal data protection and privacy. Maintain that on the personal level and institutional. Policy wise, yeah, I agree with Mitch. There's a lot more intelligent people hopefully working on this than me. So I don't want to put words in their mouth.
Well, I think this is a great note to end on, making sure we're all personally safe and defending against this threat. But I want to thank our guests for coming. If you could all join me in thanking them for this wonderful conversation. This was really, really interesting. For our in-person audiences, we have some snacks in the back, so feel free to grab before you're on your way out, and you can chat with our guests for a bit as well. So